Hello, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. U.S. federal judge Theodore Chueng has blocked the Department of Government Efficiency from making further cuts to USAID agency after he ruled that Elon Musk's actions violate the Constitution. The order also requires the Trump administration to restore computer access to all USAID employees, including those on administrative leave. Now, is this only the first in a series of rulings against Donald Trump's policies? And how will the situation develop? To answer these questions and much more, we are joined now by our guest, Joshua Burgin, coordinator of the New Security Leaders Program at the Warsaw Security Forum, and obviously, of course, expert in U.S. domestic and foreign affairs. Good evening.
Good evening. Nice to see you this night from Florida.
Right. So let's start with the ruling. How significant is this ruling on USAID?
Well, Maciej, another big day in the tug of war between the Trump administration and its DOGE team and the establishment government of the United States. Obviously, this ruling, a preliminary injunction, will probably be appealed, and in my view, will likely go all the way to the Supreme Court as this contest for control over the status quo versus the Trump version of the future continues to play out. Obviously, those who are supportive of the injunction are happy about this ruling, and no doubt the Trump administration is strategizing tonight as to how to respond.
Now, the very same judge has blocked some of Donald Trump's policies during his first term, including the infamous Muslim travel ban. And, well, he's Barack Obama's nominee. Now, is this how the opposition will try to counteract Trump's ideas?
With the use of judicial appointees that have come from the other party, I mean, certainly there is a long history, sort of, as the U.S. Our entire body politic, the separation of powers, the legal structure, the executive branch. There is a tug of war, and I think it's important for some of my international friends to recognize that where there's claims of, oh, this is illegal, probably so, but it also fits in the realm of that separation of powers contest, and change is uncomfortable. I watched as Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House from the 1990s, voiced recently, I believe yesterday, that the Trump administration could take a more nuanced approach, let's say a scalpel versus a sledgehammer, but would get bogged down. And so they've made a choice to go big, go bold, and sort of let the chips fall where they may. Again, whether we like this or we don't like this, to some extent or another, this is the nature of the contest of the separation of powers within the U.S. government. I don't personally like everything that's happening with USAID. I know a number of good programs that have come to an end as a result. But by the same token, those on the other side would voice, hey, the institution has experienced mission creep. Much of what it's doing is not directly benefiting the United States on foreign policy and or defense and security questions, and this is necessary. So there's certainly a number of voices that are weighing in here, and we're going to have to see how this all plays out.
Now, can this ruling be overruled? Yes, you already answered this question, saying that now it will probably end in the Supreme Court. But what other presidential decrees are there to be challenged?
Well, currently there's a number, whether we're talking about the border, whether we're talking about the repatriation or the deportation of Latin Americans in the United States. We're seeing a number of areas in which the administration is being challenged legally, and increasing sort of questions around whether the first round injunctions are going to stop the administration. Boldness is one thing, but as part of the ruling outlined from Judge Chueng, you can't reform USAID in the same way that Elon Musk reforms Twitter. You can't just terminate whole ranges of staff. There is something in the United States known as due process, and they get a say. Again, this makes the system slow, difficult to reform, and I'm sure that there will be some consequences in the long and short of all this. But again, some of this is uncharted territories. I mean, I looked to the past. I looked to the example of Ronald Reagan, who famously fired the FAA air traffic controllers after they'd gone on strike. But in looking at that picture, yes, similar sorts of protest from within the media. By the same token, the president then, Reagan, was on much better ground, as the Congress had actually indicated by law that union federal employees could not strike. And so his actions were in line with the law, whereas much of what Trump is doing is testing testing the very limits of the law. And I think we're going to see things being decided on a case-by-case basis, first with the initial injunctions, then on to appeals courts, and ultimately the Supreme Court will be the final destination.
So domestic affairs and history aside, how do you rate yesterday's phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, given that despite the announcement of a partial ceasefire, nothing has changed?
Well, I voiced yesterday personally on my LinkedIn, and I'm somewhat reluctant to get deeply engaged, sort of in the social media space. But based on some of the recent attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, ongoing attacks, even as recently as yesterday, I personally think that much of what Putin is doing vis-a-vis Trump is a stick in the eye. Not being there for the entirety of the telephone conversation, I have no idea what fully transpired between those men. But nevertheless, the notion that Putin's forces are attacking a pediatric cancer hospital in Kyiv. They removed Kellogg, or basically objected to Kellogg's participation in the dialogues. They made Vitkov wait for the better part of 8 hours. I mean, every one of these things should be interpreted, in my view, as Vladimir Putin putting a stick in Donald Trump's eye and being at the very best, sort of just reactionary and not willing to go along. I frankly think Trump should see these things as a personal affront. As has often been said, he's a transactional guy. Anything that Putin is doing right now that does not come to the table with a full-on ceasefire and a move toward peace, it should be taken by Trump as an absolute affront to his engagement with Russia right now. And frankly, I don't know how long Putin can go with this. And certainly Trump's personal legacy and brand rest in the balance. If he can't figure out how to negotiate with Putin in a way that forces Putin to back down from his testing of the limits, the consistent efforts to go further and further, I think that history will not remember Trump kindly in this regard.
Right, but do you see any willingness from the Russian side to reach any sort of a peace deal?
Again, I'm a longtime Russia watcher, have been in theater and in that country as a teenager, lived there, worked in and around Russia for many years. Based on my understanding of the Russian government as it's currently formed, not a reflection of the Russian people, but of the Kremlin being run by effectively the KGB wing of the body politic in Russia, I don't see any room for Russia to back down. And if they do, it will only be a pause. And I frankly don't think that this current administration fully grasps just how diabolical, sneaky, and well-informed across the last 70 to 80 years that intelligence service is. And frankly, I think it sort of puts many of the Trump team at a disadvantage. Trump, to his credit, has negotiated hard deals in New York on real estate. No question that he's probably better than most of the U.S. body politic for hard negotiations. But the degree to which Putin and Lavrov themselves have just so much greater insights than any one of the current team that we're seeing visibly gives me room for pause.
Now, yesterday, Vladimir Putin stated that a ceasefire would only work if Ukraine stopped receiving military assistance from the West. And today, we have learned that Donald Trump wants to help Kyiv with acquiring air defense systems in Europe. Now, is this some sort of a herald of a change in Trump's approach to Moscow and to Moscow's demands?
Well, to his credit, I go back to that point around Trump has negotiated with very difficult people in a tough environment in New York City. If you can survive there, it does likely offer experience sets that do offer some value here, in contrast to past administrations that are deeply concerned about escalation, sort of committed to the notion of I'm okay, you're okay, mutually beneficial negotiations, as opposed to zero sum. I think Trump likes zero sum, he embraces it, and I think Putin's leash towards antagonism only goes so far until Trump effectively animates Ukraine and Ukraine's allies with even more weaponry to batter Russia. This is my personal read on it. That may not actually be the case, but I think there's a limit to which Putin will be able to push Trump.
Right. During his phone call with President Zelensky, Donald Trump offered U.S. help with running Ukraine's power plants, adding that the ownership would be the best protection. That's according to Marco Rubio. Now, could this really be a solution to Russian continuing attacks on Ukraine's power plants?
Well, I certainly think there's something to be said for any country in the world that experiences the risk or threat from a neighbor, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Taiwan. The notion of the number of American expats in theater raises the willingness and the political ability of Washington to engage more fully and more robustly. Again, some of the arm twisting around the rare earths metal deal, the notion of American owning power generation facilities in Ukraine, I can understand the reluctance. I can certainly see the potential downlight effects of increased costs, lack of support for the poor and those around Ukraine. Nevertheless, the notion of American expats working in the country en masse with large numbers exponentially raises the quotient for DC to have to respond and protect its interests, both financial and people.
Mm-hmm. Now, could the US be willing to listen to Volodymyr Zelensky's appeal to monitor the limited ceasefire?
Well, this is an interesting question. I mean, obviously, we've all watched with a sort of mouth agape at the degree to which Zelensky, I think just a clip running right there, Zelensky and Trump went at it from the theater of the Oval Office some weeks ago. There seems to be no apparent love lost between these men. They're forced to work together. I appreciate Zelensky's repeated demands for support from the United States, but I also think that Zelensky would benefit from a bit more advice from Washington. And when I say that, I mean someone committed to him, an American consultant that can help guide through some of the language nuance in ways that hasn't been to date. This said, I mean, there's plenty available, plenty of consultants of the Republican background in Ukraine right now that would happily work with him, help him. And I think if he can dial in the language in a way that is not antagonistic to Trump, I think Trump is more open than many would believe to security and or observation agreements, no matter what he's saying aloud currently.
And on that positive note, we'll end our discussion. Joshua Burgin, coordinator of the New Security Leaders Program at the Warsaw Security Forum, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me this evening.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more news and features here on TVP World.